Formula One is no stranger to eccentric characters and shady sponsors trying to get a piece of the action. However, with the sport becoming more corporate and with the ever-increasing professionalism, it seemed like those sorts of characters and those sorts of controversies would be resigned to the pages of history. However, then came William Storey and his energy drinks company, Rich Energy. Over the course of a year, he was involved in multiple legal battles, childish social media spats, and left a Formula One team looking like an absolute embarrassment. Before William Storey and Rich Energy became the title sponsor of Haas for 2019, he first made headlines when it was reported that he was interested in buying the Force India team before they went into administration in 2018. The problem was that not only did William Storey seemingly come out of nowhere, but no one had ever even heard or let alone even seen a can of Rich Energy for themselves, begging the question, where exactly was the money coming from for them to be able to buy a Formula One team? The mystery and intrigue of where Rich Energy even came from is a story that even to this day remains unclear. The original trademark, which at the time was simply named Rich Energy Drinks, was first registered in Croatia by a man called Drazen Mastrovic. The only thing that you'll be able to find about him with relation to Rich Energy is a bunch of photos of him with girls, but within those photos you can see the origins of what became the Rich Energy we know now. By 2015, William Storey had acquired both the name and business in some capacity, and this is when it was first incorporated into the UK, appearing on Companies House, which is a registry of British businesses. The lack of information about how much money they actually had on Companies House kept cropping up, because officially, even though they made wild claims on their website about how they had a cutting-edge manufacturing facility that was worth £50 million, their numbers in terms of assets and money in the bank didn't correlate with a company that was trying to buy a Formula One team. William Storey called the discrepancies in the financial data pretty irrelevant, and in a later interview tried to clarify where the money was coming from.
Well, I mean, we've actually got, although our shareholdings are confidential because the parent company's offshore, although we're a British business and everything's centred in London, we've got 4 sterling billionaires who sit behind the business. So we are in a position where we have a lot of liquidity.
Given that this British energy drinks business was owned by an offshore parent company, it's pretty clear that whatever money Storey was using to buy into Formula One wasn't coming from the Rich Energy business itself. In trying to buy Force India, William Storey had roped in successful businessman and West Ham owner David Sullivan into investing in Rich Energy. The details of his involvement and whether or not it was actually his money that got Rich Energy into Formula One is still very murky, but it wouldn't be a stretch to assume that potentially he was one of those mystery sterling billionaires that Storey was referring to. Even though William Storey claimed to have a deal in place with former owner Vijay Mallya, it was only known to be a £30 million sponsorship agreement to help the team from going into administration. However, this was deemed to be insubstantial by the judges given the weight of the team's debts. This was a team that needed long-term investment and also stable funding to pay off its debts. William Storey only ever saw the commercial benefits in buying the team, and Rich Energy never looked like an entity that had the right funding or motivation to do what was necessary to help the team survive long-term. What Lawrence Stroll and his consortium has since gone on to do in turning that team into Aston Martin and securing its long-term future proves that the administrators made the right choice. William Storey, however, had his eyes set on Formula One. Around the time of the United States Grand Prix, he was publicly in negotiations with Williams and McLaren about a potential sponsorship deal, which wasn't entirely a surprise because at that point in time, both of those teams were underperforming on track and also struggling financially off track. Williams was about to lose their lucrative title sponsorship with Martini, and even McLaren, if you go back and look at their car, had barely any sponsors. At the last second, however, Haas came into the frame with what Storey called a much better deal to be their title sponsor, and in October their title sponsorship with Rich Energy was announced for the 2019 season. Despite the continued skepticism surrounding Rich Energy, Gunther Steiner reassured everyone that Haas had done their due diligence. When covers broke during winter testing, it became very clear very fast that William Storey was not just going to blend into the background and be a normal sponsor. His entire philosophy with the Rich Energy brand was that they were trying to beat Red Bull. His strategy was to become this vocal antagonizer who constantly tried to compare Rich Energy to Red Bull, even name-dropping them during the car launch.
We think that Haas are, absolutely our favourite team on the grid. They're brilliant people, and they're the perfect partner for Rich Energy as we move forward to take Red Bull, challenge Red Bull on and off the track.
Storey had this idea in his head that if he kept mentioning Red Bull in relation to Rich Energy, that it would somehow elevate the brand as if the two are equal. In the end, it just came off as desperate. Throughout 2019, they kept using the hashtag better than Red Bull in almost all of their tweets, and even felt the need to put out an embarrassing tweet during the very first day of preseason testing when Romain Grosjean finished third ahead of Max Verstappen, as if that was a true indication of performance. Had William Storey just kept his mouth shut and kept his fingers away from Twitter, then maybe the partnership could have been a success for Rich Energy. But the fact that he actively wanted to be antagonistic against Red Bull, and the fact that he was so desperate for attention, ultimately became his downfall. All of the noise that he was generating in interviews and through his childish posts on social media to drum up attention for Rich Energy finally started to bite him back. In April, Rich Energy was sued by a company called White Bikes over copyright infringement. A month later, they were found guilty of knowingly copying their stag logo, which White Bikes had first used back in 2008. As a result, they were ordered to remove the offending stag logo from all of their products. All of the remaining products that had the stag logo had to either be given to White Bikes or destroyed. They had to cover the legal fees that White Bikes had incurred of over £35,000. They also had to disclose their global sales of how many cans were sold bearing the stolen stag logo. And lastly, they also had to pay compensation for damages incurred due to copyright infringement. To this day, there is no evidence that William Storey or Rich Energy actually fulfilled all of those obligations. Understandably, Haas were ordered to remove the stag logo from their car, and Rich Energy quickly designed a new logo for the brand. The bigger revelation, however, from this court case actually came from what Judge Melissa Clark had to say in her verdict about William Storey. I found both Mr. Storey and Mr. Kelly to be poor witnesses. I am satisfied that some of Mr. Storey's evidence was incorrect or misleading, and that he was involved in the manufacture of documents during the course of litigation to provide additional support for the defendant's case. He often did not answer questions directly, preferring to make speeches about his vision for his business, or alternatively seeking to evade questions by speaking in generalities or in the third person plural. He had a tendency to make impressive statements which, on further investigation or consideration, were not quite what they seemed. I do not accept either Mr. Storey or Mr. Kelly as credible or reliable witnesses, and I treat all of their evidence with a high degree of caution. I am satisfied on the balance of probabilities that both Mr. Kelly and Mr. Storey have lied about not being familiar with White's logo. I find it more likely than not that they were familiar with it, and that they directly and knowingly copied White's logo in designing Rich Energy's logo. There's no need to read between the lines that she thought William Storey was a liar, and that he also tried to manufacture evidence to help his case. Or William Storey is one of those people where, if you listen to any of his interviews, he's actually a very articulate person in the way that he speaks. But what he is saying is often not only a massive exaggeration of the truth, but also doesn't have any substance to it whatsoever. In court, when Storey was asked about how many cans of Rich Energy he had actually sold, although he had previously made claims that the number was 90 million, he then had to backtrack that in fact they had produced 90 million cans but had not filled or sold them. When pushed by the judge on how many cans Rich Energy has actually sold, his answer was circa 3 million cans. For comparison, Red Bull that same year sold 6.3 billion cans. Speaking of Red Bull, even though they never responded to any of Storey's childish tweets when he kept taking a dig at them, that did not mean that they were just going to keep letting him run his mouth without any consequences. They were the next to sue Rich Energy and William Storey over a trademark infringement. Red Bull sued for copying their advertisement slogan and using it to disrepute them, given that they had the legal trademark over the words Red Bull and also gives you wings. Whilst all of this was going on, back in the world of Formula 1, the real drama was about to start. Ahead of the British Grand Prix, William Storey announced that Rich Energy had terminated their contract with Haas, citing poor performance, despite the fact that in the previous race, Magnussen had qualified in 5th. He continued by saying that, "We aim to beat Red Bull, and being behind Williams in Austria is unacceptable. The politics and PC attitude in Formula 1 is also inhibiting our business. We wish the team well." This came as a massive shock to everyone inside Haas, and as it turned out, even to the shareholders at Rich Energy itself. To no one's surprise, you can't actually terminate a legally binding sponsorship agreement over Twitter. Haas put out a statement reaffirming that the sponsorship deal with Rich Energy was still in place, and so despite all of the drama, Haas continued to run the Rich Energy branding. Things then took an even more unexpected twist when the shareholders from Rich Energy released a statement rebutting the contract termination. The shareholders who own the majority of Rich Energy would like to clarify certain statements that have been circulated in the media from an unauthorized source. "We wholeheartedly believe in the Haas Formula 1 team, its performance, and the organization as a whole, and we are fully committed to the current sponsorship agreement in place. We also completely believe in the product of Formula 1 and the platform it offers our brand. Clearly, the rogue actions of one individual have caused great embarrassment. We are in the process of legally removing the individual from all executive responsibilities. They may speak for themselves, but their views are not those of the company. The incident is very regrettable. We will not be making further comments on this commercially sensitive matter, and we will be concluding it behind closed doors." William Storey, however, decided to not keep this behind closed doors and yet again had something to say publicly. The ludicrous statement by minority shareholders cozy with Red Bull and white bikes is risible. Their attempted palace coup has failed. I control all of the assets of Rich Energy and have support of all of the key stakeholders. There was clearly an internal power struggle for control of Rich Energy between the shareholders who were trying to oust him and Storey, who had control of the Twitter account and was the public face of the company. Throughout the weekend of the British Grand Prix, he continued to antagonize the Haas team through a series of yet more embarrassing tweets. He made fun of the fact that they hadn't removed the Rich Energy branding from their car, and then when the drivers collided on the opening lap, he infamously compared the Haas car to a milk float. Over the following month, Rich Energy saw a slew of changes going on behind the scenes as the internal power struggle continued. William Storey announced that he had sold his majority stake in the company due to the conduct of duplicitous minority stakeholders, and the company was also renamed to Lightning Volt, with Storey resigning and Matthew Kell being appointed as the new director. This in itself was a very shady and lesser-known part of the Rich Energy saga. Storey hired a group of unlicensed insolvency practitioners to essentially take over the business and wind up the company to settle their financial problems. A month later, Storey was reappointed as the director, and to this day, Rich Energy still operates under the business name Lightning Volt Limited. However, nothing indicates that the creditors who are owed money were ever actually paid. In early September, following the Italian Grand Prix, the moment that we all knew was coming was finally announced, as Haas officially cut ties with Rich Energy. In their statement, they said, "Haas F1 team and Rich Energy have amicably agreed to end their partnership together with immediate effect." While enjoying substantial brand recognition and significant exposure through its title partnership, a corporate restructuring process at Rich Energy will see the need for a revised global strategy. Haas F1 team and Rich Energy concluded that a termination of the existing partnership was the best way forward for both parties. One of the strangest and most controversial sponsorship stories in Formula 1 had finally come to its predictable and inevitable end. To no one's surprise, even in the aftermath of the termination with Haas, William Storey continued to try to weasel his way back into Formula 1, hinting at a new deal which we all knew was a lie, with McLaren. The team that just a year before was actually negotiating with him to become a potential sponsor had a very different response a year later. When asked about the tweet, Zach Brown replied, "I was sent that, and the guy obviously likes to draw attention to himself. I haven't spoken with them, I won't speak with them, I think that it's an attempt to get some publicity. Since 2019, William Storey has continued to make headlines, none of which do anything to help repair his or Rich Energy's reputation. In 2020, he tried and failed to buy Sunderland Football Club. In 2023, he tried and failed to buy Reading Football Club. He had yet another controversial sponsorship breakup with a British superbike team. And despite no one in Formula 1 wanting to go anywhere near him, he has continued to make delusional statements about how Rich Energy is on the verge of making an F1 comeback.
So we'll be a title sponsor in 2022. So that will be a black and gold livery, you know, the Rich Energy in the team name.
Will you be back in Formula 1?
I would think almost certainly. With whom is a really interesting question.
We're very, very excited about coming back to Formula 1, and we look forward to really being very competitive at the pinnacle of motorsport.
I have absolutely no sympathy for what Haas went through in 2019, because all of the warning signs and all of the red flags were there right from the outset. Whilst we all knew that this was going to end in disaster, I don't think anyone expected for it to blow up on social media in the way that it did. But Haas got exactly what they deserved in choosing to willingly go into business with William Storey. He was found to be a liar and fraud in the eyes of a judge. Despite being a grown man, he behaved like a childish keyboard warrior on social media, and the level of unprofessionalism and narcissism that he showed in terms of the modern context of Formula 1 is something that I don't think that we have ever seen before or since. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe, that would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.